Everyone, Andrew Roberts here with Midwest Whiskey, your #1 source for all that is within the wonderful world of whiskey right here in the good old Midwest of the USA. Today we are coming at you with our first installment of a first-person series that will dive into the different ways that we can evaluate whiskey with our senses. The proper term for what we're going to be doing today is called sensory evaluation, but your average Joe might call it a tasting. Whiskey experts around the world have identified that we can drink whiskey with our eyes, our noses, and of course our palate. This couldn't be more true, and while many people only look for the taste in their whiskey, to really fully appreciate your spirit, you need to incorporate all of your senses. In this video, we will look into the look of whiskey. Now, it is important for me to first say that everyone has a different ability to use their senses, so there may not be a right or wrong answer necessarily, but it is all in good fun. It is very essential to read the label to understand what type of whiskey you're dealing with, how long it was aged, depending on if the bottle clarifies that, the percentage of alcohol, which will determine the heaviness or the lightness of the whiskey itself, and then of course to determine if the whiskey was chill filtered, also if the bottle clarifies that. And I'll explain a little bit more about the chill filtration system later in the video. Now, when considering the sight of a whiskey, what we're really talking about is the term appearance. An appearance of a whiskey can be broken down into 3 different categories. They are color, texture, and clarity. For judging the appearance of a whiskey, it is recommended to use a crystal glass, which will really help bring out the color. When you take a glance at the glass, be sure to hold the glass up against a white background like so. That way the true color truly shines when you look at the whiskey. Now, the color of whiskey deals with the length of the aging process as well as the type of cask or casks the whiskey was in or aged in. Typically speaking, the American oaks will produce a little bit less of a color than your European oaks, and the color will also vary depending on if the barrel is being reused or not. Now, texture of a whiskey can be shown by looking at the legs. Swirl around your glass like so, and then patiently wait for the legs to slowly run back down, kind of like in little streams. That's what you're going to see in the legs. Now, legs that are thin and stream down sort of quickly on your glass usually mean that your whiskey is younger or lighter. While on the opposite side of this spectrum, slower and thicker moving legs mean your whiskey is a little bit heavier or possibly older. Now finally, we have clarity, which has to do with the cloudiness seen or not seen in a whiskey, not just if you can see through the spirit. This relates to the process of chill filtration that I mentioned earlier. Lower alcoholic content whiskeys often turn cloudy when water or ice is added, and this is an unwanted side effect by whiskey lovers. To help prevent this from happening, a distiller might chill the whiskey, then run it through a series of filters that will remove the fatty acids and proteins seen in the whiskey. Now, this can come at a price, as many experts may argue that when you do a chill filtration process, the look may be clearer, but the taste could be lost as well. All in all, to each distiller their own. Now that we've broken down the appearance, let's check out some whiskeys. Today we're going to be working with 3 unidentified whiskeys, as I do not want anyone to think I'm playing favorites out there. We have a grain whiskey and 2 bourbons. Let's start with the grain whiskey. Now, as you can see, we have a light bit of color here. Hold that up as close as we can. Experts use the color charts like this one seen here to describe the color. And I would put this whiskey at yellow gold just about. Now, the texture, the legs of this whiskey really seem to be medium sized and they move sort of quickly. Now, if we move on to clarity, when I add a splash of water to this whiskey, we instantly see this swirling cloudiness that points out that the whiskey might not have been chill filtered. Now on to our next whiskey, we can see a little bit of a darker texture here. I might put it on the scale at about amber, a little bit darker there. In terms of the texture of this whiskey, these legs are flowing and very quickly. They move very fast, very thin, which would lead me to believe this whiskey was not aged as long as the previous one. But In terms of the clarity, when I added a splash of water in like before, didn't really see as much of those swirls and that cloudiness that I saw in the previous whiskey. So this one, the distiller might have taken a little bit of time. Certainly a very nice looking whiskey. I'm catching some aromas, but we'll have to deal with that next week. Our third and final whiskey of the day, in terms of color, it might be in between the previous two that we had. It would probably, on the scale, I would say maybe go down as a deep copper, but definitely in between the previous bourbon and grain whiskey. In terms of the texture, this one's interesting because when you give it a nice swirl and take a look at the legs, you see quite a bit more legs than the previous two whiskeys, and it's moving pretty quickly. This whiskey might not have been aged for very long. But interestingly enough, in terms of the clarity, when you add a splash of water to this whiskey, no change, no cloudiness. So this whiskey most likely was probably chill filtered, but only the distiller really knows. Now that's going to do it for our first installment of this 3-part series about describing whiskey with our senses. In the next episode, we're going to talk about smell, which may be the most important sense when talking about whiskey. Stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check us out on Twitter at @Midwest_whiskey. Thanks.